Since the days of watching Top Gear in the mid-2000s, I've had quite an interest in cars over the years, whether it be in personal life, watching them on TV, or whether it just be like wanting to see them in real life. But I've never actually composed a list of what actually are my favourite cars ever. So that's what I've finally decided to do. With footage provided from Forza Horizon 4, today I will be compiling my top 10 personal cars list. Now this isn't necessarily about how the car drives, how cool it is. It's about what the car means to me and what type of impact it's had over the years. So this is going to be a little bit of a varied list, but I will explain each of the entries, why they are in my top 10 personal cars list. Number 10 is the Fiat 500. So at the moment I don't currently drive, but if I did, and if I could have my own car again, the Fiat 500 is always a car which I've been tempted with the idea for years. By the way, as a disclaimer, the footage I'm using is actually of the Fiat 500 Abarth, or Abarth, I think that's how you pronounce it in Italy, 695 model, because the default one you can't actually buy. So yeah, glossing over that. Yes, the Fiat 500 has always been a car which I've found, I've always liked the styling. It's pretty compact, so I feel like it would be easy to drive, and it's Italian. Whether that would be a good thing for reliability, I don't know. But yeah, I've always liked the idea of owning a Fiat 500 if I was ever to like properly drive again, because to me driving is something which you have to do. Driving is something which you only need to do if like you've got a job or if you need to drive somewhere regularly. But if I did do that, the Fiat 500 is always one car which I've always been heavily interested in. Number 9 is the Ferrari 458 Italia. So there's a little bit of a caveat with this one, I guess. There's a couple of factors. Is it the best looking Ferrari of all time? No. Is it the fastest? No. Is it probably the best sounding? No. However, it does have a good package, I'd say, of those qualities. First off, regarding its looks, I think this was the best looking Ferrari that Ferrari had come up with for years. Second, its noise, obviously, with the Ferrari V8 at the time, it was always going to be a good noise. And yeah, there's just something about this car. A couple of years ago, I said that this was, at the time, the 8th best looking car ever made. It's probably not that high up as it was, but I would say it is still maybe one of the best looking Ferraris they've made. I think it is better looking than the 488 that they released after. I think they slightly went backwards with that one. But yeah, with this Ferrari, obviously you've got the noise, you've got the badge being Ferrari, and yeah, I just think it's a nice car to look at. Will I ever get to drive one? Probably not. That'll probably never happen. But is it a good car to look at and listen to? I think it certainly is. Number 8 is the Toyota Hilux pickup truck. So with this one, yes, I am making an exception. Yes, it is a pickup truck, but I will make an exception because this car has been in some of the most crazy stuff I've ever seen for any form of car. First off, back in the old Top Gear days in the mid-2000s, it was involved in a large amount of stunts. They tried to destroy it using the ocean, using fire, using caravans, wrecking balls. They even dropped it from a tower block at one point, and it still kept working. A few years later, they used a modern Hilux to drive to the North Pole, which no other car had ever done before, so that was genuine history. And then, once again, another bit of history was that it drove up an active volcano. So this car has been part of many ridiculous things over the years, And it does deserve this place because I think it is one of the most unique vehicles I've ever watched. And yeah, it's certainly one of the toughest I've ever seen. So that's why I think it deserves a place on my list. Number 7 is the original Mni Cooper from the 1960s and from the 90s. So this one is actually a little bit of a unique case because this one, of course, is a classic in British history. Many different films and TV shows have used the original Mini, ranging from Mr. Bean to The Italian Job. It's one of the most iconic British cars ever made, and yes, I always feel happy when one of these is just driving randomly down the street because it's so small. It makes you think about how big cars are today in this market. The Mini is one of the great staples of British history, and of course it was also dominant in the rally stage as well, because a lot of the rallies it entered, actually it won quite convincingly, so it's also got some real racing pedigree as well. But yes, the Mini will always be an icon in British motorsport history, and also just it's a British icon in general, so that's why for me this deserves a place on my list at number 7. Number 6 on this list is the Ford Focus ST170 from 2003. So first off, as a disclaimer, I'm using the Ford Focus RS for this footage because the ST isn't available. But yes, for me, this is possibly the most personal entry on this list because this is a car that I've lived with for many years. My father owns a Ford ST170 for many years. For many years, like me, him and my older brother will just go travelling around all over the place, like to Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, around London. Like, it just went all over the place. So I have very fond memories of this car. It's very comfortable. It's I'd say it's relatively good looking compared to other Fords. I still think that the original Focus is the best looking one. And I've had a lot of memories in the Ford, whether it be issues on the Isle of Man or whether it just be driving to many holiday locations. It's one of the most important cars I think I've ever been a part of, and well, that's why it's on this list at number 6. Number 5 is the Eagle Speedster. So this one is an interesting one for this list because this one is actually based off a car, is actually based off another classic, which we'll get to later. But yes, for me, when I first saw this, I thought, okay, that's another kit car, another attempt at restoration, that type of thing. But as the years have gone on, the shape has become more and more like, it's one of those things where like, you don't originally like it's like a piece of food. Like, you don't like it at first, but then over the years it grows and grows until like you really like it. That's the case with the Eagle Speedster. I wasn't that big of a fan when I first saw it, but as the years have gone by and I've realised just what this car actually means and what it actually like makes you feel, it's special. That's honestly all it is to it. Like, it's one of the most unique cars in the world, and there's barely any of them around, so it makes it rare as well. And yeah, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's beautiful, it's unique, and it just makes you feel special. So that's why for me this is actually number 5 on this list. Number 4 is the Jaguar E Type. So just like with the Mini earlier, this is another one of the most iconic cars in British history, and yes, it was the definitive sports car back in the 60s. So yes, the Eagle Speedster may be one of the best looking cars, like, and one of the most special, but you know what they say, you can never beat the original. And that's always the case with something as good as the E-Type Jaguar. So the E-Type Jaguar is just one of those cars which has defined a legacy over the years. Specifically, my favourite version of the Jaguar is definitely the Mark 1 convertible. The Mark 3 for me is a bit too chunky, especially the coupe version with its grille. But yes, I still think the E-Type, the original Mark 1, is one of the best looking cars ever made. In its day, it probably was like a groundbreaking car for the British scene, really. Like, just going along like your standard 50s and 60s cars, and then all of a sudden you could get a Jaguar E-Type driving down the streets. It probably would have been very special to look at. So yeah, for me, it's one of the best looking cars ever made. It's one of the most iconic British cars ever made, and for me, it's my 4th favourite car of all time. Number 3 is the Aston Martin DB5. So without a shadow of a doubt, this is one of the top 5, I'd say, most iconic film cars of all time. It's defined, of course, by James Bond, and it's one of the 60s greatest cars. For me, I still think it's one of the best looking cars ever made. I think it's still the best looking Aston Martin ever made. Is it the best to drive? Probably not likely. But it is an all-time classic, and whenever you just see one of these, you get the feeling that someone really cares for what they drive. This car has pedigree, this car has looks, it just about has everything, and of course, it's an Aston Martin. So this car, I'd say, is on my top 3 for my top 10 favourite cars. Taking the runners-up spot on this list, we have at number 2 the Alfa Romeo 8C Competizione. Well, I'm just going to refer to it as the 8C actually. So this was actually a very hard decision, and actually one of the hardest I've had to make making top 10 lists. Which car was my all-time favourite? In the end, I ended up putting the Alfa Romeo at the second place spot. So for me, the main reason why this is actually so high up is because, in my opinion, this is this generation's poster car. So this is the equivalent of what the Lamborghini Countach was back in its day, maybe what the Ferraris and the Lambos were back in its day. This, for me, I think is easily the best looking car ever made, but I've heard it's not the best to drive, and it doesn't actually sound that great. So for me, this is based on looks. Like, I've never actually seen one of these in real life yet, because they are actually quite rare. I think only 500 were brought to the UK. But yeah, I would really love the opportunity one day to see one of these firsthand, because I mean what I say in saying this, for me, is the best looking car ever made. But there is one car, I think, which has had a bigger impact on me, which in the end I couldn't really ignore. Number 1, the Aston Martin DB9. So, I'm using the DBS as footage for this because the DB9 isn't available in Forza. But for me, the DB9 is the most important car for me personally, because without the DB9, I wouldn't have been interested in cars in the first place. So without the DB9, there wouldn't have been Top Gear or the Grand Tour, there wouldn't have been Formula 1. And yes, this is a very important car for me, for a, well, not necessarily a hobby, for a interest perspective. The first Top Gear episode I ever remember watching was the DB9 versus the TGV race back in 2004, I believe it was, where Clarkson was in the Aston and Hammond and May was in the TGV. I just remember seeing the Aston Martin, like how graceful it was, I also think this is one of the best looking cars of all time. Yeah, hearing the noise and just being enthralled by the race. Without the Aston, I don't think I would have been interested in cars, and that's why, inevitably, I had to put it at number 1 for my top 10 favourite cars of all time.